Welcome to Wisdom for the Present, where we take ancient truth and bring it into clear, modern understanding. This episode uses AI-generated narration based on human-researched and written material.
Exactly, and I'm so excited for what we're getting into today.
Yeah, because normally, when you think of an ancient legal code, you probably expect this really dry, brutal list of crimes and punishments.
Right, like something carved into a massive stone monolith just to terrify peasants into submission.
Exactly. But when you open the book of Deuteronomy, specifically if you look at chapters 12 through 26, that entire expectation just gets completely shattered.
It really does. It's almost jarring.
It is, because suddenly you're reading this legal document that mandates throwing massive neighborhood block parties with the poor.
Yeah.
And then you flip the page and you're reading a constitutional blueprint that strips the supreme monarch of his military power.
Right, and then the next chapter is just building codes about roof railings.
Exactly, or these hyper-specific instructions about what to do if you find your enemy's donkey wandering in a ditch. It's just an incredibly jarring, almost chaotic legislative landscape.
It absolutely is. I mean, when you first encounter it, it feels like cognitive dissonance,
Oh, completely.
Because we are so used to modern legal categorization.
Mm-hmm.
We put civic law over here, religious practices over there in a different box, and social welfare is managed by a completely different government department.
Right.
But this text just refuses to do that. It presents this comprehensive, totally interwoven worldview where the economic, the spiritual, the emotional, and the civic, they're all literally the exact same thing.
Yeah. And to really understand why it's written this way, we have to look at exactly where the audience is standing when these words are first spoken. So set the scene for us. What is the historical reality here?
Okay, so the Israelites are literally standing on the precipice of this monumental transition. They are right on the edge of the Promised Land, the land of Canaan. And you have to remember, for the last 40 years, they have been a generation of wandering nomads. Their entire existence in the wilderness has been completely transient.
It's just living in tents.
Exactly. Living in tents, moving whenever the cloud moved.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't plant crops because, well, they didn't own any land to plant them on.
So they are essentially a massive population of stateless refugees who have just survived on daily manna.
Precisely. And now, that is all about to change entirely. They are about to cross the Jordan River and become a settled agricultural society.
Wow.
They're going to build permanent stone houses. They're going to plant vineyards, which take years to actually yield fruit. They're going to establish walled cities and complex trade networks.
And this specific text, it's framed as Moses delivering his final parting speeches to them right before he dies.
Yes.
Right.
And the core challenge Moses is addressing here is survival. But this is key. It's not just physical survival.
Right.
It's ethical survival. Moses knows that once they settle down, they're going to be surrounded by and eventually replacing these Canaanite cultures.
Right. And those cultures were completely different.
Fundamentally different. They were built on blueprints of exploiting the peasant class, the accumulation of just massive wealth by despotic kings, and religious practices that were incredibly transactional.
And pretty horrific, too, from what we know.
Oh, frankly, horrific. I mean, they included things like child sacrifice just to appease these volatile gods.
Yeah.
So Moses is trying to architect a society from the ground up that reflects the character of a completely different kind of God.
Okay, so let's actually dig into the mechanics of this architecture. And I want to start with something that honestly completely blew my mind when we were preparing for this deep dive.
I think I know what you're going to say.
It's in chapters 12, 14, and 16. Because before the text even gets into the nitty-gritty of civil lawsuits or property rights, it focuses heavily on how the community celebrates and how it remembers.
The tithe.
Yes. It deals with the concept of the tithe. Now, for you listening, when you hear the word tithe today, the immediate modern translation is usually, giving 10% of your income to a church or some charity. Right.
You write the check, it leaves your bank account, and it goes to an institution.
Exactly. It's viewed primarily as giving up your resources. But the second tithe, described in this ancient text, is functionally a mandated vacation fund.
It really is.
God commands the Israelites to take a tenth of their agricultural yield, their grain, their wine, their oil, and travel to the central sanctuary. But they don't just drop it off and go home.
No, they are commanded to actually spend it on a massive feast for themselves, their families, and their local community.
Which is just, it's so wild to me.
It's actually one of the most brilliant pieces of social engineering in the ancient world.
How so?
Well, you have to picture the agrarian reality of this time period. Farming in the ancient Near East was a life of just back-breaking, relentless anxiety.
Because you're totally at the mercy of the weather.
Entirely. You are entirely dependent on the rain. A drought literally means starvation for your family. A locust swarm means total ruin. So the psychological baseline for an ancient farmer is to hoard everything you grow out of pure terror for the future.
Wow, yeah. So God literally legislates a break in that anxiety. The law steps in and says, no, you must take 10% of this harvest and you must rejoice.
Exactly. It institutionalizes celebration. It literally forces the farmer to stop working, step away from the fields, and actually enjoy the fruits of their labor in a communal setting.
And the logistics of this are really fascinating, too, because the text acknowledges that hauling 10% of a farm's output,
which is a lot of stuff.
Yeah, like sacks of wheat, jars of wine, herds of animals, hauling that all the way across the country to the central sanctuary might be physically impossible if you live far away.
Right. You can't exactly FedEx a flock of sheep.
Exactly. So the law provides this conversion mechanism. It says you can sell the produce locally, convert it into silver, tie the money securely in your hand, and travel to the sanctuary.
And then the phrasing the text uses here is just remarkable.
Oh, I love this part.
Right. It tells them to use that money to buy whatever your soul desires. It specifically lists cattle, sheep, wine, or strong drink. And you eat it there before the Lord your God, and you rejoice.
Okay, but let me push back on this a little bit, just from a modern perspective, because from a purely economic standpoint, this seems incredibly inefficient.
Sure.
You are taking 10% of the national GDP, basically. And rather than reinvesting it into infrastructure or saving it for a famine year, you are legally mandating that the population literally eat and drink it in a giant festival.
Right.
How does a fledgling nation actually survive that kind of massive consumption?
Well, if you view the nation merely as an economic engine, yeah, it looks completely inefficient. But this text views the nation as a covenant community.
Okay.
Think about what hoarding does to a society over time. It creates massive wealth inequality. It breeds deep isolation, and it fosters this mindset of absolute scarcity where every neighbor is just a competitor for resources.
That makes sense.
By forcing the population to liquidate a portion of their wealth and consume it joyfully together, you are actively dismantling that scarcity mindset. You're building social cohesion. You're creating shared memories.
And it wasn't just a private VIP feast for the wealthy landowner and his immediate family either.
No, not at all.
The guest list is heavily regulated by the law.
That is the crucial mechanism here. The text explicitly commands the landowner to include the Levite. Now, for context, the Levites were the priestly tribe, and uniquely, they were not given any land inheritance in Israel.
Right, they had no farms of their own to grow food.
Exactly. They were entirely dependent on the community. So the law ensures they are brought to the table. And furthermore, it commands the inclusion of the male and female servants.
Wow.
The very people who actually plowed the fields and pressed the grapes are sitting down to eat the prime cuts of meat and drink the wine alongside the landowner.
That is amazing. It just flattens the social hierarchy, at least temporarily. You're sharing the highest quality goods with the lowest ranking members of your household.
Yeah.
And then it gets even more localized with the third-year tithe.
Yeah, the cycle shifts.
Yeah.
So every third year, instead of taking that tithe to the central sanctuary for a national festival, the law says you keep it in your own town.
But again, you don't just keep it for yourself in your own barn.
Right. You gather it within your city gates, and it acts as a localized welfare system. It is specifically designated for the local Levite, the foreigner residing among you, the orphan, and the widow.
Which are really the ultimate vulnerable demographics of the ancient world.
Without a doubt.
If you didn't have a family structure or land rights back then, you had absolutely nothing.
Exactly. The orphan and the widow have lost their primary economic providers.
Yeah.
The foreigner, or the immigrant, has no ancestral land rights and is completely at the mercy of the host culture.
Right.
This third-year tithe guarantees that these specific groups can come and eat and be satisfied.
What really strikes me about this is the physical proximity. You aren't just sending a bag of grain to some anonymous government distribution center.
It was very personal.
You are gathering this food in your own town square. You are looking the widow in the eye. You actually know the orphan by name. It forces the community to directly interact with their own marginalized members.
And if we compare this to the broader religious environment of the ancient Near East, it is a staggering paradigm shift.
Give me an example of that.
Well, look at something like the Babylonian epic, the Enuma Elish. In that worldview, humans were literally created out of the blood of a defeated monster for one specific purpose.
Which is what?
to do the hard labor that the gods were tired of doing, and to feed the gods through sacrifices.
Wow.
The gods are viewed as these hungry, fickle tyrants.
So the humans just exist to serve the divine economy. They're just workers.
Right. But here, the God of Israel doesn't need the food. God requires the humans to feed each other.
Oh, that's so good.
The divine demand isn't for upward appeasement. It is for horizontal care. The worship of God is intrinsically tied to the joy and the physical survival of your neighbor.
So worship is literally defined by how you treat the vulnerable. And that ties beautifully into how they're commanded to remember their history. In chapter 26, there's this liturgy involving a basket of first fruits, and this is the very first yield of the harvest, right?
It is. It's a profound ritual. When an Israelite farmer brought that first basket of produce to the priest, they didn't just hand it over in silence and walk away.
Right, they had to speak.
They had to recite a specific, highly choreographed historical creed. They had to stand there and publicly declare, "A wandering Aramean was my father. He went down into Egypt and lived there, few in number, and there he became a great, mighty, and populous nation."
They are referring to their ancestor Jacob, a wandering Aramean. I mean, it's not exactly a boastful title.
No, it's deeply humbling. Think about the foundational myths of other great ancient empires.
Right, Rome.
Exactly. Rome traces its lineage back to Romulus and Remus, the children of Mars, the god of war. They claim this divine conquering blood. Babylon traces its roots to divine kingship descended directly from heaven. But Israel's foundational myth, the creed they must recite at the very moment of their greatest economic success, the harvest, is a declaration of extreme vulnerability.
My ancestor was a homeless nomad. My people were enslaved laborers in a foreign land.
Exactly.
It's like an anti-myth. It refuses to let them romanticize their origins into something powerful or arrogant.
Because romanticizing your origins always leads to arrogance. If you believe your success is due to your own inherent greatness, your superior bloodline, or just your own brilliant farming techniques, you will inevitably look down on those who are struggling.
Oh, absolutely.
You will view the poor as deserving of their poverty. But if you are forced to annually declare, "I only have this land because God rescued my enslaved ancestors," well, it completely changes your relationship to the land and to the people who are currently landless.
It's a grounding mechanism. It essentially weaponizes their historical trauma to produce modern empathy.
Precisely. The memory of their own marginalization becomes the ethical engine for how they treat the marginalized in their present reality.
Okay, so how do we translate this for you today? Because for you listening to this deep dive, we don't live in an agrarian society, and you probably aren't hauling baskets of pomegranates to a priest.
Probably not.
But the underlying wisdom is incredibly relevant. We live in a culture that just pushes us to constantly produce, to endlessly accumulate, and to relentlessly optimize our time.
Yeah, we treat our resources, our money, our energy, our time as things to be hoarded against future anxiety.
Exactly. And we often isolate ourselves in our success.
We do.
So the challenge this ancient text poses for you is, how do you institutionalize joy? Do you have a mandatory feast built into your life where you stop hoarding and actually enjoy what you've built with the people you love?
And more importantly, do you invite the people who can offer you absolutely nothing in return?
Right. Furthermore, when you get that promotion, when your business takes off, when you hit that massive milestone, do you have a personal liturgy that reminds you of where you started? Do you actively remember your own wandering Aramean days to keep arrogance from taking root?
Because arrogance inevitably leads to the abuse of power.
Oh, totally.
And that concept actually transitions us perfectly into how this ancient law dealt with the ultimate concentration of power in their society.
Yes, let's talk about the king. Chapter 17 outlines the rules for the future king of Israel. And what is so fascinating about this to me is that Israel doesn't even have a king yet when this is written.
Right, not for a long time.
They won't have one for hundreds of years. But the law anticipates it and sets up these guardrails long before the throne even exists. And it is basically an anti-despot manual.
It is entirely countercultural. In the ancient world, whether you look at the pharaohs of Egypt, the Hittite kings, or the kings of the Assyrian Empire, the monarch was often viewed as semi-divine.
He was the law.
Exactly. He didn't just enforce the law. His word was the law. His primary function was to project absolute power, to amass vast wealth, and to conquer. The success of a nation was entirely measured by the terrifying might of its king.
But the blueprint for the Israelite king is a radical inversion of that whole concept.
Complete inversion.
The text gives 3 incredibly specific negative commands. It says the king must not multiply horses for himself, he must not multiply wives for himself, and he must not greatly multiply for himself silver and gold.
Yeah.
Now, let's break these down, because to a modern ear, forbidding a king from owning too many horses just sounds like a very strange, overly specific agricultural zoning law.
Right, it sounds kind of random. But in the context of the ancient Near East, a horse was not a farming animal.
You used oxen to plow.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The horse was the tank of the ancient world. It was the ultimate symbol and embodiment of aggressive military might. Chariots were essentially the weapons of mass destruction of their day.
Okay, so this isn't about animal husbandry. It's literally an arms control treaty.
Exactly. And the text specifically warns against sending people back to Egypt to acquire these horses, because Egypt was the major arms dealer. They were the primary breeder of war horses.
Oh, wow.
By forbidding the multiplication of horses, the law is explicitly forbidding the king from building a massive, aggressive standing army.
And why is that so dangerous?
Because a massive standing army inevitably leads to 2 things: a reliance on fleshly, military strength rather than a reliance on God, and the overwhelming temptation to engage in foreign wars of conquest.
Okay, and what about the wives? Obviously, ancient kings had massive harems. I mean, King Solomon notoriously violated this rule later on. But what was the functional purpose of multiplying wives in antiquity?
Well, it wasn't just about sensuality or demonstrating virility, though that was certainly part of the cultural cachet. Primarily, royal marriages were the ultimate foreign policy tool.
Oh, to make alliances.
Right. You married the daughters of surrounding kings to forge political alliances and secure peace treaties. But the law warns that these foreign alliances would turn the king's heart away.
Away from what?
From God. It would introduce foreign idolatry and compromise the distinct ethical and spiritual identity of the nation. It was a warning against entangling foreign alliances that required theological compromise.
And finally, he must not greatly multiply silver and gold.
Which strikes right at the heart of the royal treasury. I mean, how does an ancient king amass mountains of gold?
Usually by crushing his own people.
Yes. Through crushing taxation and forced labor of his own citizens, or through the violent plundering of his neighbors. The law is preemptively outlawing the hoarding of national wealth in the palace while the peasantry starves.
So let's look at what the law has just done here. It has stripped the king of his military superiority, it has stripped him of his foreign diplomatic leverage, and it has stripped him of his massive royal treasury.
Yes.
It is essentially writing a constitution that legally mandates the President of the United States must commute in, like a used Honda Civic, dismantle the Pentagon, and maintain a personal bank account no larger than a middle school teacher's.
That is a brilliant way to picture it.
It strips the king of every single metric that the surrounding world used to define greatness.
Because the Israelite king was never meant to be supreme overlord. He was meant to be a brother. The text explicitly says his heart must not be lifted up above his brothers. But the law goes even further than that. The most radical requirement isn't what the king is forbidden to do, it's what he is actually commanded to do.
Oh, this is my absolute favorite part. Chapter 17, verse 18. It says that when he sits on the throne, he must write for himself a copy of this law on a scroll in the presence of the Levitical priests.
He has to hand copy the Constitution himself.
He can't just hire a scribe.
No, he cannot hire someone to do it for him. The physical act of writing every single statute, every law regarding the poor, every limitation on his own power, it forces him to internalize it.
Yeah.
And then he is commanded to keep it with him and read it all the days of his life.
He literally has to carry it in his pocket. He is a king who is quite literally bound by a book.
It establishes the absolute bedrock principle of the rule of law. The king is under the law, not above it. He is merely a subject of the true king, which in this context is God.
Right.
If the king violates the law, he is just as guilty as the poorest farmer. In a world of absolute, unquestioned monarchs whose whims were the only law, this concept is breathtakingly modern.
Okay, so that's how the text handles the macroeconomics of power at the very top. But this deep dive also takes us into the microeconomics of power, how power is handled between everyday citizens, particularly regarding debt and labor.
Yes.
Let's look at chapter 15, the year of release. Every 7 years, debts between Israelites were canceled. But here is where we hit a massive obstacle to growth for a modern reader, and we really have to tackle it head on.
What do you do?
In this same chapter, it discusses a Hebrew man or woman being sold to you, serving you for 6 years, and then being released in the 7th year. The modern listener hears sold and serving, and understandably just recoils. We are talking about slavery. How do we navigate this text with intellectual honesty without just dismissing it as barbaric?
It is definitely one of the most difficult hurdles for modern readers, and it requires profound historical discernment. We have to separate the brutal, race-based chattel slavery of the modern era, which is an absolute moral abomination, from the economic realities of the ancient Near East.
Okay, unpack that.
In the ancient world, there was zero social safety net. There was no bankruptcy court. There was no Chapter 11. There was no government welfare, no unemployment insurance, and absolutely no public housing.
So what happens if a famine hits, your crops fail, and you borrow money just to buy seed, but then the next year the crops fail again?
You fall into an insurmountable debt spiral. Once you sell your land to pay the debt, you have absolutely nothing left to use as collateral. Your only remaining asset in the ancient world was your own physical labor.
So it's economic desperation.
Yes. Selling yourself was a desperate, last resort economic measure for survival. It was essentially indentured servitude.
Yeah.
You worked for a creditor to pay off a debt you could not otherwise satisfy.
But let me push back on this, because even if it's indentured servitude, it is still a system that is just ripe for horrific abuse.
Oh, absolutely.
The creditor has total leverage. They control your food, your shelter, your labor.
They do, which is exactly why the biblical text does something completely unprecedented here. It looks at this harsh, entrenched economic reality of the ancient world, and it actively bends it toward human dignity.
How so?
It puts a hard stop on the exploitation.
Yeah.
While surrounding cultures practiced permanent servitude, where generations of a family could be trapped in debt bondage forever, the Israelite law mandated the 7-year release.
So no matter how much money you owed, no matter how unbalanced the ledger was, in the 7th year, the debt is wiped clean and you walk away free.
Yes. It limits the catastrophic fallout of economic failure. It prevents the creation of a permanent generational underclass. But the law doesn't just stop at releasing the servant. It demands economic rehabilitation.
Right.
When the servant is freed, the master is commanded not to let them go empty-handed. The text says you must furnish him liberally out of your flock, your threshing floor, and your winepress.
And the Hebrew phrasing there is striking. It literally translates to, "Thou shalt lay on his neck," meaning to adorn him with gifts.
Right.
You aren't just kicking him out the door with the clothes on his back so he can starve and fall right back into debt the next week. You are giving him a severance package. You are giving him the seed capital to restart his life as an independent citizen.
Exactly.
But hold on, let's look at this rationally from the perspective of the creditor. Because if I know that year 7 is coming, and I see a poor farmer asking for a loan in year 6, I am not going to lend him a dime.
Right, the math doesn't work.
Exactly. It's a massive moral hazard. This law seems guaranteed to just freeze the credit markets exactly when the poor need it most.
And this is where the text proves how deeply it understands human psychology, because it anticipates that exact reaction.
Oh, really?
Yes, chapter 15 explicitly warns the creditor against harboring a base thought in their heart, saying the 7th year, the year of release, is near, and therefore refusing to lend to the poor brother.
Wow.
The law commands the creditor to lend generously anyway, despite the financial risk, despite the approaching amnesty.
It essentially demands that the citizen prioritize the physical survival of their neighbor over the mathematical safety of their own portfolio.
Precisely. And it grounds this incredible demand in empathy. The text explicitly tells the master, "You shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God redeemed you."
There's that historical memory again.
Exactly. The historical memory of their own oppression is the lever used to pry open their wallets. You were trapped, and God released you. Therefore, you cannot trap your neighbor.
That deep empathy is really hardwired into the microeconomic laws of Chapter 24 as well. These are essentially the earliest consumer protection and workers' rights laws in human history.
They really are.
For example, if you lend money to a poor man and take his cloak as collateral, a pledge, you must return that cloak by sunset.
Because for a poor man in the ancient world, his cloak was his only blanket. If you keep it overnight, he freezes. The law recognizes that your right to hold collateral does not supersede his right to survive the night.
And there's an even more nuanced law about spatial dignity. The text says that when you make a loan and go to collect the pledge, You cannot enter the debtor's house.
Oh, I love this one.
Yeah, you have to stand outside, and the debtor must bring the item out to you.
Think about the psychological impact of that. When you owe someone money, the power dynamic is incredibly skewed. The creditor holds all the cards.
Right.
But this law says that even if a man is drowning in debt to you, his home is still his sanctuary. You cannot use your financial leverage to kick open his door, march into his living room, and start appraising his belongings.
You cannot strip him of his spatial dignity.
No, you must stand outside on the street and wait. It forces the creditor to show respect to the debtor.
And then there's the protection for the day laborer. Chapter 24 says you must pay a hired worker his wages before the sun goes down, for he is poor and sets his heart upon it.
This recognizes the brutal physical reality of living paycheck to paycheck, or in this context, day to day. A wealthy landowner can afford to process payroll next week.
Sure.
But a day laborer needs those coins tonight to buy flour so his children can eat tomorrow. Delaying payment isn't just an administrative inconvenience, it is a catalyst for starvation. The law forces the employer to view the world through the eyes of the most vulnerable worker.
So bringing this into the 21st century for you listening, we obviously aren't dealing with cloaks and threshing floors today, but the dynamics of leverage are identical.
Absolutely.
If you are a boss, a landlord, a manager, or anyone who holds power in a transaction, how do you treat the people who depend on you? When you have the upper hand, do you extract every last legal ounce of advantage? Or do you leave margin?
Yeah.
Do you respect the boundary of your employee's house, their time off, their psychological dignity? Do you realize that what might be a minor administrative delay on your desk could be a crushing financial crisis for the person waiting for that check?
It really demands that we interrogate our own leverage. Are we using our power to secure ourselves at the expense of others, or are we using our power to furnish liberally those who work under us?
Which brings us to Section 3, the sanctity of life and proactive neighborliness. We've talked extensively about economic dignity, but chapters 19, 21, and 22 deal with the physical safety and the actual lives of citizens.
Yes.
Let's look at the cities of refuge in chapter 19. This is a fascinating mechanism for dealing with violence in a stateless society.
To understand the cities of refuge, you have to understand the mechanism of the avenger of blood. In ancient tribal cultures, there was no centralized police force.
Right. No 911.
No state prosecutor. If someone murdered a member of your family, justice was entirely the responsibility of the victim's closest male relative. He was duty-bound to hunt down the killer and execute them. It was a system of blood vengeance.
Which honestly functioned as a severe deterrent. I mean, if you kill someone, you know their entire clan is coming for you.
Yes, it's deterrence in the absence of a state apparatus. But the catastrophic flaw in this system is accidents, what happens when it's not premeditated murder.
Right.
The text gives a very specific, relatable example. Two men go into the forest to chop wood, and one man swings his axe, the iron head slips off the handle, strikes his neighbor, and kills him.
It's an absolute tragedy.
It's a tragedy, but it's manslaughter, not murder.
But the Avenger of Blood doesn't care. He just sees his dead brother, and the blood feud begins. If he kills the woodchopper's family retaliates, and suddenly you have a multi-generational Hatfield and McCoy war over a faulty axe handle.
Exactly. So the law introduces a circuit breaker, the city of refuge. The unintentional killer can flee to one of these designated cities. Once inside the gates, the Avenger of Blood cannot touch him.
Wow.
The city provides a neutral sanctuary where the man can receive a fair hearing before the elders to determine if it was truly an accident. It is the nascent invention of state-arbitrated justice replacing tribal vengeance.
But what I find so compelling are the logistical requirements surrounding these cities. It wasn't just a theoretical concept. The physical landscape of the nation had to be engineered to make this grace accessible.
Yes, rabbinic traditions and historical commentaries outline the immense effort put into this. The roads leading to the cities of refuge had to be impeccably maintained by the community.
They had to be wide, right?
They were required to be extremely wide, often cited as 32 cubits, which is roughly 48 feet wide. Every spring, obstacles had to be cleared, and bridges had to be built or repaired over ravines so that a fleeing man wouldn't be delayed.
That's incredible.
And at every major crossroad, there were literal signposts erected with the word refuge pointing the way.
It is just a stunning physical metaphor. The community was legally obligated to smooth out the path to mercy. They had to ensure that grace was easy to find and easy to reach.
Yes.
And this concept of proactive safety wasn't just for city planners. It filtered all the way down to the individual homeowner. Chapter 22 gives us the law of the roof battlements.
Ah, yes.
When you build a new house, then you shall make a railing around your roof so that you don't bring blood on your house if anyone falls from there.
This requires a bit of architectural context. In the ancient Near East, roofs were not pitched. They were completely flat. And because the climate was warm, the roof was essentially the living room.
You'd hang out up there.
People dried flax up there, they socialized up there, they slept up there in the cool evening breeze. It was a heavily utilized living space.
So by mandating a battlement, a parapet, or a wall around the edge, the law is establishing a foundational principle of tort law and liability.
Exactly. It's saying that your personal property rights do not eclipse your responsibility for your neighbor's physical safety.
Yeah.
You cannot just build your house however you please and say, well, if my guest is clumsy and falls off my roof, that's their own fault. They should have been more careful.
The law says, no, you are morally responsible for the foreseeable accidents that happen within your sphere of influence. You have to spend the extra money and lay the extra bricks to build a guardrail. You have to anticipate human error and protect people from it.
It is the cultivation of a spirit of proactive humanity. And this proactive involvement extends far beyond your own property line. Later in chapter 22, the text says that if you see your neighbor's ox or sheep wandering away, or if you see their donkey fallen down under a heavy burden on the road, you cannot, and this is the operative phrase, you cannot hide yourself from them.
Hide yourself? That is such a piercing psychological description. I mean, how many times have we seen a problem, recognized that someone needs help, and conveniently looked at our phones or crossed the street or just pretended we were too busy?
You do it all the time.
We hide ourselves because involvement is inconvenient.
We calculate the cost of getting involved. Lifting a fallen donkey is heavy, dirty, dangerous work. Returning a wandering ox takes hours out of your day. But the law explicitly commands involvement.
Even if you don't like the person, right?
Exactly, even if they are your enemy. It says that inconvenience is the baseline cost of living in a covenant community. You cannot turn a blind eye to your neighbor's crisis.
So the challenge for the modern listener is profound. Where in your life are you currently hiding yourself? Where are you pretending not to notice a coworker's struggle, a neighbor's crisis, or a systemic failure because getting involved would cost you time or social capital?
That's a hard question.
It is. And taking it a step further, how can you build battlements in your modern life?
Yes. Where do you need to erect guardrails?
Exactly. If you are a parent, a manager, a software designer, you have a sphere of influence. Are you proactively creating safe environments, whether physical, emotional, or psychological, anticipating where people might fall and putting up protections before the tragedy happens? Building a battlement is an act of foresight driven by love.
It is looking at the systems you control and asking, is this designed to protect the vulnerable, or does it leave them dangerously exposed?
Okay, we've talked about the beautiful, empathetic parts of this text, but if we are going to be intellectually honest guides through this deep dive, we cannot just cherry pick the inspiring verses about lost donkeys and roof railing.
No, we really can't.
We have to face the music. We are moving into the darkest corners of the text.
Right.
War, crime, and severe justice. When a modern reader hits chapters 13, 20, 21, and 25, it is incredibly jarring.
It is. These chapters contain commands that deeply offend our modern sensibilities, and we must confront them directly without making cheap apologetic excuses.
Right. A reader hits chapter 21 and reads the law about stoning a rebellious son. They hit chapter 20 and read commands regarding warfare that involve the complete destruction of Canaanite cities. They hit chapter 13 and read about executing false prophets who try to lead the community into idolatry.
Yeah.
The immediate reaction is revulsion. The modern listener throws their hands up and asks, why would I want to extract wisdom from a text that sounds this draconian?
And that reaction is entirely valid. To engage with these texts requires a high level of discernment. We have to look at the historical trajectory of justice. We have to ask, what was this law doing in its own time? Let's take the most visceral example, the law of the rebellious son in chapter 21. The text describes a son who is stubborn, rebellious, a glutton, and a drunkard who refuses to obey his parents. The law says the parents are to bring him to the elders of the city, and the men of the city shall stone him. To a modern reader, that just sounds like an endorsement of horrific child abuse. It sounds like giving parents the right to murder a difficult teenager. But if we contextualize this within the legal norms of the ancient world, a completely different picture emerges. In the surrounding pagan nations, and famously codified later in Roman law as patria potestas, a patriarch held the absolute unquestioned power of life and death over his household.
Oh, wow.
A Roman father could execute his child privately in his own home for any reason, with absolutely zero oversight from the state. He was the judge, jury, and executioner.
Total unchecked patriarchal tyranny.
Exactly. But what does the law of Deuteronomy actually do? By requiring the parents to bring the son to the elders at the city gate, it actually takes the power of life and death away from the father.
Oh, so they can't just do it themselves.
The parents can no longer execute the son. They are forced to file a formal accusation, which requires verifiable evidence, and subject the case to a public trial by the local magistracy.
So it takes private, impulsive, hidden violence and replaces it with public judicial due process. What looks to us like a barbaric law was, in its own historical moment, a massive limitation on parental tyranny. It protected the child from the sudden wrath of the father.
And historical rabbinic records suggest that the evidentiary requirements for this law were so impossibly stringent that it was virtually never carried out. Its function was primarily to establish the authority of the courts over the authority of the patriarch.
That completely flips the script.
Let's look at another highly difficult text. Chapter 21, the law regarding taking a captive wife from a conquered enemy.
Again, deeply abhorrent to a modern mind. The very concept of taking a captive woman is a violation of human rights.
Absolutely abhorrent today. But we have to look at the horrifying reality of ancient warfare. In the ancient theater of war, captured women were routinely raped, immediately enslaved, treated as literal commodities to be bought and sold, or just killed. They had zero rights.
Yeah.
But look at the specific restrictive regulations this law imposes on the Israelite soldier. If he sees a captive woman and desires her as a wife, he cannot just drag her to his tent. The law mandates a strict process.
Right, he has to bring her into his house, and then she must shave her head, trim her nails, and discard the clothing she was captured in.
Which commentators point out were acts of transition and purification. Shaving the head wasn't a punishment. In that culture, it was a recognized mechanism for shedding her past life, moving from the traumatic state of a captive alien to an acknowledged member of the household.
But the most striking part is the timeline. The law mandates that she is given a full, untouched month to mourn her father and her mother.
Yes, the soldier is forced to wait. He is forced to respect her grief. The law carves out a legally protected space of time for her to process her traumatic loss before any marriage can take place.
Wow.
And the text adds a massive radical caveat. If, after this time, the man has no delight in her, he must let her go wherever she wishes.
He is explicitly forbidden from selling her for money, and he cannot treat her as a slave because he has humbled her.
In a world where women were spoils of war, this law stripped the victorious soldier of his absolute property rights over her. It prevented her from being trafficked. It forced an ancient, brutal, testosterone-driven system to bend toward the dignity and psychological well-being of the woman.
It's the trajectory of justice. The law meets the ancient Israelites where they are in a brutal militaristic world and begins pulling them forward toward a higher ethical standard. And we see this trajectory culminate in a massive shift in ancient jurisprudence in chapter 24, verse 16. It says, "Fathers shall not be put to death for their children, nor shall children be put to death for their fathers. A person shall be put to death for his own sin."
This is a monumental breakthrough in the history of human rights. In ancient Oriental nations, corporate guilt was the absolute standard. If a man committed treason against the king, the state didn't just execute the man.
They killed everyone.
They executed his wives, his children, and his parents to entirely wipe out the bloodline and prevent future revenge.
But Deuteronomy explicitly outlaws corporate punishment. It establishes the bedrock principle of individual responsibility before the law. You cannot be punished for the crimes of your parents. Your children cannot be punished for your mistakes.
And furthermore, it demands rigorous, verifiable evidence. Chapter 19 requires 2 or 3 independent witnesses to convict someone of a crime. A single witness, a single accusation is never enough to pass a sentence.
It is the relentless pursuit of verifiable justice. As the text famously declares, justice you shall pursue. So how do we translate these darker corners of the text into modern reflection? It challenges you to look at our own era with a highly critical eye.
We look back at ancient laws and call them barbaric. But what systems, what penal practices, what economic structures do we accept today as just the way things are, that future generations will look back on and view as entirely barbaric.
That is the ultimate reflection. Are you participating in the ongoing moral trajectory of justice, or are you stubbornly defending the status quo? When you are dealing with entrenched, outdated, or even destructive systems in your industry or your community, how do you inject humanity and due process into the situation?
How do you limit unchecked power, just as the law of the rebellious son limited patriarchal tyranny?
Exactly, and how do you create protected space for grief and dignity, just as the law of the captive wife carved out a month of mourning in the midst of the brutality of war? We are all called to be agents who bend the systems we inhabit toward mercy.
We really are.
Which brings us to our final synthesis. We have covered an immense amount of ground in this deep dive, from the logistics of agricultural block parties and the constitutional limitations on kings, to the mechanics of debt forgiveness, roof battlements, and the hardest realities of ancient law.
We have. And when you pull all the way back and look at the overarching architecture of chapters 12 through 26, the primary insight becomes clear.
What's the bottom line?
The goal of all these incredibly specific laws isn't just behavioral compliance. God wasn't micromanaging an ancient society just for the sake of exerting control. The ultimate goal is the creation of a society that reflects the very character of God himself. It is an attempt to build a civilization that is strictly just, remarkably joyful, deeply mindful of its own vulnerability, and radically, almost obsessively protective of the weak.
It is an architecture of empathy. And I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over on your own. It comes from a tiny, easily missed law in chapter 23, verse 15. It is a law forbidding the return of a runaway slave to his master.
Yes, this one is huge.
Now, context is everything here. In the ancient world, treaties between sovereign nations explicitly required the extradition and return of runaway slaves. If you look at the Code of Hammurabi or the international Hittite treaties, returning a slave was a foundational geopolitical norm. Harboring a runaway was basically an act of international hostility.
But the text tells the Israelites, "You shall not hand over to his master a slave who has escaped from his master to you. He shall live with you in your midst. In the place which he shall choose in one of your towns where it pleases him, you shall not mistreat him."
Think about the implications of that for a second. Israel is commanded by God to be a sanctuary for the oppressed, even if it means breaking the established international treaties of their day.
They are commanded to become a rogue state for the sake of mercy.
Exactly. The law demands that they prioritize the freedom of a desperate runaway over the diplomatic peace of the region. So here's the question for you. What cultural norms of your industry, your peer group, or your society do you need to actively break in order to become a sanctuary for others?
Wow.
Where is the status quo demanding your compliance, but the call to humanity is demanding your rebellion?
Where must you refuse to hide yourself and instead build a battlement?
That's the heart of this section. This is Wisdom for the Present, where understanding leads to clarity, and clarity shapes how we see and live. We'll see you in the next episode.